The story begins amidst the unforgiving cold of the snowy mountains, where a man lay on the ground, battered and bruised, his body trembling from exhaustion and pain. One of his hands had been severed, leaving a trail of blood staining the icy surface beneath him. Surrounding him was a group of men, their expressions filled with menace as they loomed over his broken form. One of them stepped forward, his voice laced with cold arrogance as he told the wounded man that escape was impossible. He then demanded to know the location of the ancient relic, his gaze sharp with expectation. Despite his agony, the injured man let out a scornful chuckle, his lips curling into a smirk. He called them fools, his voice hoarse yet defiant, and added that if they were in his position, they wouldn't surrender the answer so easily either. His words ignited a surge of fury among his captors. One of them, unable to contain his anger, stepped forward with his weapon raised, ready to strike. However, before he could land a blow, his companion swiftly intervened, grabbing his arm to stop him. The restrained man's breath was heavy with frustration, but the other one remained composed. He told his enraged teammate to let go of the injured man's words and instead focus on contacting the main squad. Without hesitation, he retrieved a communication tool from his belt and sent a message to their superiors. His tone was firm as he reported that they had successfully captured the Northern Phantom, the very man lying before them in his weakened state. He also requested confirmation of their location. A moment later, the receiver crackled to life. A voice from the other end confirmed their transmission and assured them that their coordinates had been identified. Reinforcements would arrive soon. The man took a step closer, his eyes filled with a mixture of amusement and disbelief as he addressed the Northern Phantom. He marveled at the sheer persistence of his captive, unable to comprehend how he was still clinging to life despite having lost a hand. As he spoke, his tone shifted, and he changed the subject. He questioned why the Northern Phantom was after the same relic that the Emperor sought, his curiosity laced with suspicion. Before an answer could come, his teammate scoffed and interjected, claiming there could be no other reason except for the Northern Phantom's relentless desire to be a thorn in their side. Frustration flickered in his eyes as he continued, recalling the endless trouble the Northern Phantom had caused them over the past several days. He turned to his comrade and suggested that before the main squad arrived, they should make use of the time they had left. He wanted the Northern Phantom to pay for all the hardships he had inflicted upon them. Hearing those words, the faint smile on the Northern Phantom's face faded. Sensing a shift in expression, the man stepped forward and warned him to brace himself. He and his teammates had no intention of stopping until their captive was broken, until he was left with no choice but to desperately beg for death. With that grim declaration, the group turned to one another, quickly deciding who would have the first turn in delivering the beating. Time was running short, and their reinforcements would be arriving soon. They needed to make every moment count. One of the men reached into his pocket and pulled out a coin, tossing it into the air to decide who would have the first turn in beating the Northern Phantom. As they watched the coin spin, lost in their cruel anticipation, the Northern Phantom suddenly bit down on his remaining hand. Pain jolted through his body, but his mind was set with unwavering determination. He refused to let this end without putting up a fight. A thought burned in his mind, a reminder of who he truly was. He was the first failed awakener of the Draker household, the very same Northern Phantom they now sought to break. His real name was Zeke Draker. Memories of his past surged through him like a storm. He had been born into the renowned Draker family, a lineage of legendary Dragonslayers. Yet, unlike his kin, he had been cursed with a body incapable of wielding aura. His failure to awaken had sealed his fate as an outcast, deemed unworthy of the Draker name. Branded as useless, he had been cast out from his own household, abandoned and scorned. But he had refused to be swallowed by despair. To survive, he had pushed himself beyond all limits, doing whatever it took to grow stronger. A saying echoed in his mind, one he had heard long ago. It claimed that those who pursued only strength would ultimately be left with nothing. To him, those words meant nothing. They were spoken only by the privileged, by those who had never tasted true weakness. With that final thought fueling him, Zeke summoned every last ounce of energy left in his battered body. His muscles screamed in agony, but he forced himself forward. Before the men could react, he surged ahead like a predator striking its prey. His sword flashed through the freezing air, and with a single swift motion, he severed one of their heads clean from his body. Blood sprayed across the snow, staining the white landscape in crimson. Silence followed for a brief moment as the others stood frozen, their expressions shifting from amusement to sheer disbelief. As soon as he struck down his first opponent, Zeke wasted no time and immediately shifted his focus to the next. With ruthless precision, he dispatched the second man within seconds, his blade cutting through flesh as effortlessly as before. Standing amidst the lifeless bodies, Zeke took a breath and reflected on the brutal truth of the world. The weak were destined to be trampled by the strong, their possessions stolen, their existence reduced to nothing. Strength was the only currency that mattered, and he had long accepted this reality. As this thought settled in his mind, he reached down, picked up his severed hand from the frozen ground, and reattached it using his magic. A faint glow flickered along the wound as his flesh mended itself seamlessly. But just as he finished, his gaze lifted, and he was met with the sight of the remaining enemies still surrounding him. It was clear that escape was impossible. Even so, the men hesitated for a moment, their eyes widening in disbelief as they watched him restore his severed limb. Shock turned to disgust, and they branded him as an irregular, an abomination. One of them sneered and declared that as long as they severed his head, even a monster like him would not survive. Without hesitation, both sides charged at each other, weapons clashing in a violent frenzy. The battle raged on, each strike a desperate bid for survival. Zeke fought relentlessly, his body moving on sheer willpower alone. Blood painted the snow beneath them, and one by one, his enemies fell. By the time the battle ended, Zeke was the last one standing. The bodies of his foes lay scattered around him, lifeless and broken. But victory had come at a heavy cost. Now on his knees, he gasped for breath, his vision swimming. Multiple swords were lodged deep into his back, and every movement sent unbearable pain searing through his body. He could feel the last remnants of his strength slipping away. Fury burned within him as he clenched his fists, cursing his situation. He knew there was no escaping this fate. His wounds were too severe, his body too drained. No matter how much he fought against it, the reality remained the same: he was not going to make it out alive. His time had finally run out. As Zeke knelt on the bloodstained snow, he thought to himself that even though he would not live to see his revenge fulfilled, he had at least managed to steal the relic the Emperor so desperately sought. In the end, he had achieved something, no matter how small. His grip tightened around the relic, a faint smile forming on his lips. With a quiet sigh, he whispered an apology to Alicia, knowing he would not be making it out of this place alive. But just as the weight of death began to settle over him, the relic in his hands suddenly radiated a golden light, its glow enveloping him entirely. From within that blinding brilliance, an unknown superior being emerged, its presence overwhelming and beyond comprehension. At that moment, a system notification materialized before him, its voice ringing clearly in his mind. It informed him that his unyielding will had awakened an ancient power. It further declared that the soul of an elder dragon had been engraved upon the will of the one who persists, and that an urgent measure had now been activated. As Zeke struggled to process what was happening, the system abruptly asked if he agreed with its declaration. Confusion flickered through his weakening mind, and he dismissed the voice as nothing more than a hallucination born from his impending death. He muttered for the noise to quiet down, assuming it was nothing but his failing senses playing tricks on him. Yet the system remained relentless, repeating its question again and again. With each repetition, the voice grew more insistent, refusing to be ignored. Weary and exasperated, Zeke finally relented. Without much thought, he muttered that it could do as it pleased with him. As Zeke uttered those words, the system immediately confirmed the Awakener's agreement. It declared that an irreversible promised power was now being activated and that the countdown had begun. As the timer rapidly ticked down to 0, a sudden shift overtook him. When Zeke opened his eyes, he was met with a sight that left him momentarily stunned. His body had completely changed. He was no longer in his battered, war-torn form but instead found himself in the body of his younger self, back when he was still a child. A wave of confusion washed over him as he struggled to comprehend what had happened. His mind raced with the question of whether he had somehow traveled back to the past. As he recalled the brutal battle he had just fought, the vivid sensation of a sword piercing his stomach still lingered, making it even harder for him to believe what he was experiencing. Lying in bed, he slowly observed his surroundings, and a sense of familiarity crept over him. It was just as he suspected. He was in a place known as the Cradle, more specifically, the Draker household's elite training institution. Memories surged through him as he recalled the legacy of his family. The Draker household was one of the three great transcendent bloodlines, a lineage that had shaped history itself. 1,000 years ago, the hero Tarakan Draker had slain the evil dragon Bahamut, saving the continent from destruction. His descendants carried on his legacy, founding the powerful Draker household. Perhaps due to their connection to the legendary Dragonslayer, every member of the Draker bloodline possessed the blessing of aura. They were born with the innate ability to awaken high-level aura and ascend as formidable knights. But there was one exception. One anomaly in their proud lineage. That exception was Zeke himself. As Zeke pondered his situation, the system abruptly reappeared, its voice resonating in his mind as it announced that the administration system was restarting. Startled, Zeke bolted upright in his bed, his heart pounding. He glanced around, searching for the source of the mysterious voice, wondering if he had misheard it. Yet before he could make sense of anything, the voice echoed again, confirming the alignment of his soul and declaring that the soul of the chosen awakener had successfully merged with the will of the elder dragon. The system continued, stating that Zeke had obtained partial authority over its functions. It then greeted him formally, informing him that it was activating his status window viewing rights. Confusion settled deep within Zeke as he struggled to comprehend what was happening. Then, without warning, a translucent window materialized before him, filled with an overwhelming amount of information. As he examined the strange display, he noticed an array of moving images, reminiscent of magical video recordings. A thought crossed his mind: had an artifact somehow been activated? Just as he was considering the possibility, the system spoke once more, confirming that his status window had been opened. Within the window, a detailed breakdown of his abilities was displayed. His gaze locked onto the information presented, and his confusion only deepened. His class was listed as a healer, one of the rarest and most unconventional roles for someone of his background. Alongside that, he had been granted a title, the one who received the blessings of the dragon. The system continued to display information, revealing Zeke's class skills, which included healing, composed mind, vigor recovery, and heightened senses. In addition to these, it listed other combat-related abilities such as precise stab and slash, both ranked at E, as well as critical strike, which was ranked at D. Among the skills displayed, one stood out, a draconian skill. However, the system informed Zeke that he was currently unable to view its details, as unlocking it required 10 karma points. At the moment, he had none. As Zeke examined the status window, he realized that he could navigate through it much like a magical video, allowing him to interact with the displayed information seamlessly. His gaze moved to his stats, confirming that he had access to both class skills and, more intriguingly, draconic skills. This discovery brought forth an important realization. The draconic language was no longer in use in the current era. This discovery brought forth an important realization. The draconic language was no longer in use in the current era. Memories of his past resurfaced. His previous master had once spoken of how the people of the ancient world categorized themselves into different classes based on their strengths. Each class specialized in a particular technique, which became known as skills. His master had recognized Zeke's potential early on. Since he belonged to the healer class, he had the ability to use the skill known as healing. Aware of this, his master had subjected him to relentless training, pushing him to the very brink of death, convinced that Zeke's healing ability would allow him to endure even the harshest trials. Returning to the present, Zeke finished recalling his past and focused on his current situation. According to the status window, he was already a healer. Wanting to test his abilities, he activated his power, and a bright light radiated from his hand. Seeing this, Zeke was astonished. His healing magic was real. In his previous life, he had only awakened as a healer in his 20s, right after unlocking the Ether Hall. The fact that he could now use his powers meant that his Ether Hall had already been unlocked. Checking to confirm, he found that his assumption was correct. With this realization, Zeke understood that while his trained body no longer existed, he had returned to the past with his skills and memories intact. Compared to who he was before his regression, he now had a significant advantage. To make the most of it, he needed to assess everything at his disposal. As he continued scrolling through the status window, a voice suddenly called out, addressing him as master and asking for permission to enter. Panic surged through him. He had yet to finish reading the window's contents, and more importantly, he had no idea how to make it disappear. The person outside the room told Zeke that it was useless to pretend he wasn't there, as the person already knew Zeke was inside. The voice then added that they were coming in. In a panic, Zeke quickly told the person to wait, but it was too late. The door swung open, revealing Zeke's exclusive servant, Decker. Decker, upon seeing Zeke, expressed disbelief that Zeke wasn't prepared yet and asked what on earth he had been thinking. Zeke, still confused by what Decker had just said, asked him what preparation he was referring to. As Zeke observed Decker more closely, he noticed that Decker couldn't see the status window displayed before him, and he felt a sense of relief that Decker was unaware of it. However, before Zeke could relax, Decker's anger flared, and he looked at Zeke with fury. Decker couldn't believe Zeke was seriously asking that question. At the sight of Decker's fury, Zeke froze, paralyzed by fear. As he thought about the situation, he remembered that he had always been terrified of Decker ever since he was young. Although Zeke now had the mind of a 32-year-old, the fear that had been deeply ingrained in him during his childhood resurfaced, and he realized he couldn't escape the emotions embedded in his body, no matter how much time had passed. As Zeke pondered the situation, the system activated his class skill, Composed Mind. Suddenly, his mind began to calm, and Zeke was surprised to feel his nervousness vanish instantly. The system then displayed the details of the skill, explaining that Composed Mind allowed the user to remain unfazed regardless of the situation, maintaining a steady and focused mental state. Zeke, observing the window, thought to himself how convenient it was that such a skill existed and that it activated automatically. Decker, noticing that Zeke seemed spaced out and unresponsive, spoke up again. He reminded Zeke that he had repeatedly emphasized the importance of the event, but he could see that Zeke wasn't paying attention. Decker then asked Zeke if he was even listening to him. Zeke, now composed, replied that of course, he had been listening. He acknowledged that Decker was referring to the evaluation test, known as Pancration. The Draker family, to which Zeke belonged, followed a strict training system known as the Cradle. From the age of 7, every member had to undergo rigorous training for 5 years. During this time, the instructors would evaluate the students each year through swordsmanship competitions and no-holds-barred Pancration matches. The opponents were typically chosen by the instructor, though there were instances where students could select their own opponents, as long as both consented. Since there were no rules, these matches often resulted in injuries, and some even ended in death. However, as the outcome of these battles determined the class into which each student would be placed within the academy, the children had no choice but to fight with everything they had, even if they didn't want to. Back in the present, Zeke was standing inside the academy, in the arena, along with the other students. They were all standing at attention, listening intently to their instructor. The instructor spoke up and reminded the students that, as they all knew, today was the day of Pancration. He then added that this was the final part of their evaluation. In response, all the students replied in unison, acknowledging that they understood what the instructor had said. The instructor, Pan Mark, upon hearing the students' responses, noted that they all seemed to be in high spirits. He then told them they would begin immediately and instructed them to prepare for the evaluation. All the students responded in unison, agreeing to the instructor's words. However, as the students answered, a murmur spread among them, and the topic of discussion was none other than Zeke. One student mocked Zeke, remarking that he was still here for the evaluation after the humiliation he endured the previous year. Another student chimed in, saying that if he were in Zeke's shoes, he would have run away, unable to bear the shame. Other students questioned how Zeke, a direct bloodline of the Draker family, could have fallen so low. Zeke, however, remained silent, listening to the insults thrown his way without responding. In that moment, the instructor called two students forward, Aaron and Gata, who were going to be the first to fight each other. At the instructor's signal, the fight began, and in a split second, Aaron demonstrated his superiority by defeating Gata with a single strike. As Zeke sat in the audience watching the fight, he thought to himself that it was boring. The match ended so quickly, and he noted that this was the result of not assuming a proper defense position. The instructor then spoke up, announcing that Gata was no longer able to fight, and Aaron was declared the winner. Zeke, however, remained bored and thought to himself that in his past life, he had been deathly afraid of this evaluation when he was young. Now, as he observed the students participating in the evaluation, Zeke realized that they were nothing in comparison to him. While Zeke continued to yawn and observe the fight, one student fixed him with a menacing stare, eyeing him as his target. Soon after, it was time for Zeke's fight, and his opponent turned out to be Leon, the same student who had been eyeing Zeke from the start. The instructor then asked if both of them were ready for the fight, and both Zeke and Leon confirmed they were. Zeke, still feeling sleepy and wiping his eyes, thought to himself that he wasn't thrilled about facing Leon. Leon, on the other hand, smirked and told Zeke that Zeke had dared to participate in the evaluation. Leon then added that it seemed Zeke still hadn't had enough of his attention from last year, implying that Zeke hadn't yet learned his place. At that, Zeke gave a light smile as memories of the previous year came flooding back. He remembered how Leon had made a fool of him and forced him to beg for his life, threatening to annihilate him. Despite Leon's insults, Zeke remained confident in himself, knowing he was no longer the same person he used to be. He thought to himself that, although Leon had always been his opponent every year, this time it was a good thing. It was finally Zeke's chance to take his revenge on Leon. As Zeke observed Leon, he was certain that Leon had been pulling strings behind the scenes to ensure that Zeke was always placed as his opponent. Zeke knew that even if he were to tell his family, they would probably respond with something stupid, like how he needed to overcome such dirty tricks in order to become a true Dragonslayer. This annoyed Zeke even further, especially since Leon was his cousin. Zeke then recalled that in his past life, the four siblings of the direct bloodline had never had the chance to meet, but there were more than a dozen cousins, all of whom were more than willing to bully him. As Zeke continued to recall his past, Leon spoke up. He acknowledged Zeke's bravery for returning to the arena after having been beaten by him the previous year. But Leon added with a smirk that it might not have been bravery at all. Instead, he claimed that Zeke simply hadn't learned his lesson, implying that Zeke was inferior not only in body but also in mind. In that moment, the system activated the composed mind skill, calming Zeke's thoughts. He realized it had been a while since he had to endure one of Leon's idiotic insults. Zeke's expression shifted, becoming serious. He called out to Leon, warning him that Zeke wouldn't be kind if Leon referred to him as inferior one more time. Leon, undeterred, stepped closer to Zeke, grabbing his head and mocking him by calling him inferior again. In that moment, Zeke activated his critical strike skill, which delivered a devastating blow to the enemy. The attack may be countered if it missed, but Zeke's punch landed squarely on Leon's face, sending him flying backward with incredible force. Leon screamed in agony, his face badly injured from the blow. Zeke, after delivering the attack, thought to himself that he had only intended to knock Leon out, but the skill had activated unintentionally when he punched as he normally would. Realizing this, Zeke understood that he wasn't yet able to fully control his abilities. The instructor rushed to Leon's side, checking to see if he was still conscious. He then turned to Zeke, demanding to know what he was doing, as Zeke had attacked Leon before the official start of the fight had been announced. Zeke, however, told the instructor that no battle on the battlefield ever started with a ready, set, go announcement. He then gave the instructor a menacing look, saying that the one who struck first would always have the advantage. Upon hearing this and seeing the intensity in Zeke's gaze, the instructor felt a chill run down his spine. He could sense the bloodlust radiating from Zeke and couldn't believe that someone like him could emanate such dangerous energy. In that moment, Leon spoke up, assuring the instructor that he was fine and insisting that the fight continue. He declared that he was going to kill Zeke, calling him an inferior piece of trash. Zeke, hearing this, smiled darkly and told Leon that it was Leon who had failed to learn his lesson. Zeke promised to teach him that lesson right then and there, as both of them locked eyes, their faces set with the intent to kill. The instructor, seeing the resolve in both their eyes, stood up once again and gave the signal for the fight to begin. Without hesitation, Leon charged toward Zeke, ready for the clash. As the fight continued, Leon realized, while exchanging blows with Zeke, that he was feeling a sense of fear from the punch Zeke had landed on him earlier. However, as the fight progressed and Leon endured more punches, he noticed that Zeke's strikes didn't seem to hurt him at all, even when they connected. Leon then thought to himself that if he just kept his guard up, Zeke wouldn't be a threat. But he acknowledged that the real danger lay in Zeke's left-hand counter, something he needed to watch out for. As if on cue, Zeke delivered a left-hand counter aimed at Leon, but Leon easily dodged the attack. Smiling menacingly, Leon thought that Zeke's attack patterns were too obvious, making the fight seem like it would be an easy victory for him. As Leon dodged, he quickly seized Zeke's body, intending to overpower him. He then taunted Zeke, telling him to die. But in the split second that Leon made his move, something unexpected happened. Leon was struck by an attack he couldn't even comprehend, unsure of where it had come from. The instructor, observing the scene, was stunned by what he had just witnessed. He couldn't believe that Zeke, who was only 12 years old, had such a refined combat style. When Leon dodged Zeke's counter and tried to grapple with him, the instructor had thought that Leon would come out on top. But at that moment, Zeke punched Leon squarely in the chin, breaking free from Leon's hold. Leon had let his guard down, thinking he had Zeke in his grasp, but Zeke remained composed, even after his counter failed. The instructor, watching in disbelief, couldn't comprehend how the Zeke he knew had developed such concentration and precision. Zeke was able to deliver exact and effective strikes with remarkable skill. Leon, realizing he was in trouble, thought to himself that if the fight continued like this, he wouldn't stand a chance. He decided he needed to create some distance between himself and Zeke. However, before he could act, Zeke charged forward and landed a powerful kick to Leon's legs, injuring him badly. Leon was shocked that someone so small could inflict such damage. Furious, Leon charged at Zeke with all his anger. Meanwhile, Zeke, satisfied that he was able to control his strength this time, focused on the fight. As Leon's attack came close, the system popped up and notified Zeke that his class skill, heightened senses, had been activated. His senses were temporarily enhanced, and Zeke immediately recognized the familiar feeling. With his enhanced senses, Zeke knew he was in full control. He told himself that now, after mastering his power, he would bring the fight to an end. He grabbed Leon's hands and, with overwhelming strength, slammed him to the ground. The force was so great that it cracked the earth beneath them. The air was thick with silence as the smoke and dust began to settle. The instructor and the audience were in complete shock, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. But the fight was far from over. The system activated Zeke's skill, Precise Stab, which allowed him to target his enemy's weak points for critical damage. As the skill activated, Zeke's hand became enveloped in a purple aura. With Leon still pinned to the ground, Zeke looked at him and stated that with this final attack, even Leon should learn his lesson. Leon, in desperation, begged Zeke to stop, but it was futile. Zeke, without hesitation, delivered the final blow, ending the fight right then and there. The entire arena was filled with a deep sense of fear and shock as they processed the scene before them. Zeke, rising to his feet, casually brushed his hair aside and remarked that his head felt clearer now that he had exerted himself. He then noted that he could finally recognize the people in the arena. Turning to the students, he told them to stop standing around and to come down to the battlefield if they had something to say to him. As Zeke openly challenged the rest of the students, one of them suddenly stood up. His name was Jakin Vardek, another of Zeke's cousins, and he wasted no time in making his intentions clear. With a firm voice, Jakin declared that he would be Zeke's Pancration opponent. He added that, just as Zeke had addressed the rest of the students, he too had something to say to Zeke. Zeke, upon hearing Jakin's challenge, responded without hesitation. He acknowledged that it was perfectly fine for Jakin to challenge him, but he immediately added that a one-on-one fight would be far too dull. The idea of facing only Jakin did not excite him in the slightest. Wanting to make things more interesting, Zeke turned his attention to one of Jakin's servants, a young man named Liam Stone. Without hesitation, he addressed Liam directly, stating that he was more than welcome to join the fight as well. Zeke believed that if Jakin had Liam's help, it might actually turn into a fair match, something that might at least provide him with a minor challenge. Jakin, however, was furious at Zeke's overwhelming confidence. The way Zeke dismissed him so easily, as if he were not even worth fighting alone, was nothing short of insulting. His blood boiled as he stepped forward, his voice filled with outrage as he demanded to know whether Zeke had just deliberately insulted him. Zeke, unfazed by Jakin's anger, responded with an infuriatingly bright smile. Without a hint of hesitation, he confirmed that he had indeed done exactly that. As if that were not enough, he went further, calling Jakin an idiot for not realizing it sooner. Jakin's fury only intensified. His eyes burned with rage, his hands clenched into fists as he struggled to contain the overwhelming desire to strike Zeke right then and there. The sheer arrogance in Zeke's tone, the way he smirked without a care in the world, made Jakin's blood boil. No longer able to hold back, he finally spoke, his voice filled with unrestrained anger. He swore that he would beat Zeke to death, that he would make him regret ever speaking to him with such blatant disrespect. Jakin and Liam, without hesitation, stepped forward, making their way toward the center of the arena. The tension in the air was palpable as they positioned themselves directly in front of Zeke, standing face to face with him. Their expressions were firm, their eyes locked onto his with unwavering determination. The murmurs of the surrounding students quieted as all attention shifted to the three figures at the heart of the arena. The instructor, watching the scene unfold, took a step forward and addressed Zeke directly. With a stern voice, he reminded him that under no circumstances was he to make a move before the official signal was given. Any premature action would not be tolerated. Zeke, listening to the instructor's words, simply nodded in agreement, showing no sign of resistance. With the formalities settled, the instructor wasted no time and immediately began the countdown to mark the start of the match. The numbers echoed through the arena, each second bringing them closer to the inevitable clash. However, as the countdown progressed, Zeke's expression gradually shifted. A slow, menacing smile crept onto his face, his gaze locked not on Jakin, but on the other participant, Liam. It was an unexpected reunion, one that Zeke found undeniably intriguing. Though Jakin stood before him as his supposed opponent, it was Liam who truly caught his attention. Memories from his past life surfaced in his mind, bringing forth a series of recollections that had long been buried. Even in his previous existence, Liam had served as Jakin's loyal companion, following him into both the cradle and the academy. However, unlike the others, Liam's background as a distant relative had hindered his advancement, leaving him at a disadvantage when it came to education. Zeke vividly recalled how Liam, unwilling to be left behind, had once pleaded to be allowed into Valhalla, the higher division of the academy. His request, however, had been denied. Unable to reach the upper echelons of academia, Liam had instead taken a different path. He joined the Knight Order of a small nation known as Baranan, dedicating himself to the blade. However, as fate would have it, Baranan eventually fell, and with its collapse, Liam was forced to reinvent himself. Thus, he embraced a new identity, that of a mercenary. In times of chaos, people inevitably gravitate towards strength, and Liam was no exception. With years of experience on the battlefield, he quickly rose through the ranks, earning recognition for his unmatched skill. In time, he became a Red Knight, a title reserved for the most formidable warriors, and established his own force, the Stone Mercenaries. Under his leadership, the three largest mercenary groups were united under one banner, and before long, he had earned a title that struck fear into the hearts of many. He became known as the Mercenary King. Zeke's memories carried him even further, transporting him to the days of the Great Continental Wars. When the Empire sought the might of the Stone Mercenaries, Liam entered the battlefield as a force to be reckoned with. It was during this period that Zeke, alongside the Northern forces, had faced Liam as an enemy. He remembered the sheer devastation Liam had caused, the seemingly unstoppable presence he had commanded. In the past, Zeke had not been strong enough to match him, and the thought of it had long remained a bitter stain in his memory. But now, things were different. The circumstances had changed, and so had Zeke. He was no longer the man he had been in his past life, and he would not allow history to repeat itself. With that thought in mind, his menacing smile deepened, his confidence unwavering. This time, he told himself, things would unfold in a completely different manner. The instructor, with a firm and decisive motion, raised his hand and gave the ready signal, officially marking the start of the match. In that very instant, without wasting a single moment, Jaken sprang into action. With a burst of speed and unwavering determination, he lunged forward, closing the distance between himself and Zeke in the blink of an eye. His movements were precise, his intent clear. He was going to strike first and put Zeke on the defensive. As he reached his target, Jaken unleashed a powerful attack, putting all of his strength into the strike. Confidence surged through him as his blow connected, a fleeting moment of satisfaction washing over him. However, that moment was short-lived. Zeke, his expression calm and unshaken, raised his arm with practiced ease and blocked the attack effortlessly. His gaze was serious, his movements fluid and composed, as if he had anticipated the strike long before it even came. While holding back Jaken's assault with barely any effort, Zeke spoke in a steady, almost mocking tone. He made it clear that if Jaken was the only one attacking him, then this fight was going to be far too easy. There would be no struggle, no challenge, and certainly nothing for him to take seriously. If Jaken truly wanted to stand a chance, then he needed to fight alongside Liam. Only together could they hope to make this match even remotely interesting. Jaken, his pride wounded by Zeke's words, gritted his teeth as he quickly wrenched his hand free from Zeke's grip. The insult burned in his mind, but he refused to let it get to him. With an intense glare, he firmly declared that he had no intention of following Zeke's suggestions. He was not going to allow himself to be manipulated, nor was he going to fall for whatever cheap tricks Zeke was trying to pull. Fueled by frustration and determination, Jaken immediately retaliated. Without hesitation, he twisted his body and delivered a powerful kick aimed directly at Zeke, fully intending to catch him off guard. Yet once again, Zeke remained completely unfazed. With a swift and effortless motion, he raised his arm and blocked the incoming kick without even flinching. To Jaken's shock, the impact did nothing to Zeke. Instead, a sharp, searing pain suddenly shot through his leg, causing him to stagger backward in agony. It took only a second for Jaken to realize what had happened. The moment his leg had struck Zeke's arm, it had felt as if he had just kicked an immovable wall. His foot throbbed with pain, the force of the impact reverberating through his bones. Zeke, having anticipated the attack, had hardened the area of his body where the kick had landed, ensuring that Jaken would suffer the consequences of his reckless strike. With an air of smug confidence, Zeke remarked that Jaken should have been more observant before blindly throwing out an attack. Jaken, now unable to move properly, found himself in a difficult position. His injured foot throbbed, making it harder for him to maintain his stance. His mind raced as he tried to decide what to do next. However, before he could come up with a plan, he suddenly sensed movement. Lifting his gaze just in time, he saw Zeke charging toward him at full speed, his intent unmistakable. There was no hesitation in his movements, no wasted energy, just raw, calculated aggression. As he closed the distance, Zeke's voice rang out, carrying a sharp warning. He reminded Jaken of a crucial mistake, one that no fighter should ever make. In the middle of battle, one should never take their eyes off their opponent. Zeke wasted no time as he charged up his next attack, his body moving with a fluid grace that made it clear he was in complete control of the fight. His eyes locked onto Jaken, his movements precise, exuding an aura of absolute confidence. Jaken, sensing the incoming strike, reacted instinctively. Without thinking twice, he raised his arms, positioning them defensively in front of his face in an attempt to block what he believed would be a devastating blow. His breathing was heavy, his body tense, fully expecting to endure the full force of Zeke's attack. However, in that very moment, Zeke's lips curled into a menacing smile, his expression filled with amusement. He had already seen through Jaken's fear, his hesitation, the way his body flinched under pressure. With a voice dripping in mockery, Zeke remarked on how afraid Jaken was while fighting him. Every movement Jaken made reeked of desperation, of someone who knew deep down that he stood no chance. Without missing a beat, Zeke added that Jaken had failed to recognize the simplest of tricks, his first attack had been nothing more than a feint. The realization dawned on Jaken too late. Just as he braced himself for an attack to his face, Zeke made his real move. Instead of striking with his fist as Jaken had anticipated, Zeke suddenly shifted his weight and delivered a vicious kick aimed directly at Jaken's legs. The impact was brutal, knocking Jaken off balance and sending a sharp jolt of pain through his already injured limb. He stumbled backward, barely managing to keep himself from collapsing, his breath ragged as he struggled to process what had just happened. Zeke, standing tall and unscathed, looked down at Jaken with a knowing smirk. He wasted no time in reminding him once again of the warning he had given earlier. This was exactly why he had told Jaken to attack together with Liam. If Jaken had listened, if he had swallowed his pride and fought alongside his servant, perhaps he would have stood a better chance. But now, he was nothing more than a vulnerable target, a lone fighter who had overestimated his own abilities. Seizing the moment, Zeke activated his skill, precise stab, his movements swift and deliberate. His strike landed directly on one of Jaken's weak points, sending a shock wave of pain coursing through his body. The force of the attack was overwhelming, and within seconds, Jaken lurched forward, coughing up blood as his body struggled to withstand the damage. His vision blurred for a brief moment, his entire being shaken by the sheer intensity of Zeke's assault. Yet, even in his weakened state, Jaken refused to let this humiliation go unanswered. With what little strength he had left, he clenched his fists and let out an enraged shout, his voice echoing throughout the arena. His frustration, his anger, his desperation all culminated in a single command. He called upon his servant, Liam, ordering him to act immediately. There was no hesitation in his voice as he gave the order. He wanted Liam to kill Zeke right then and there, to put an end to this fight in an instant. Liam, who had been watching the battle closely from the sidelines, remained motionless for a brief moment. His sharp eyes analyzed everything that had transpired, taking in every movement, every exchange. As he observed Zeke's overwhelming strength, a thought crossed his mind. Could this person truly be the same age as him and Jaken? The way Zeke fought, the level of skill he displayed, was something far beyond what should have been possible for someone their age. On the other hand, Zeke's focus had already shifted to Liam. He had no intention of underestimating him, and he knew all too well the danger that came with facing him in battle. In his past life, Liam had been a warrior of terrifying skill, and the most frustrating thing about fighting him was his sheer reach. His attacks extended farther than most, giving him a significant advantage in close combat. If Liam was allowed to take control of the fight, if he was given even a single opening to strike first, then things would become far more troublesome. Zeke understood that he could not allow that to happen. He needed to take the lead, to dictate the flow of the battle before Liam had the chance to unleash his full strength. With that thought solidified in his mind, he steadied his stance, his eyes locked onto Liam, and prepared himself to strike before his opponent had the opportunity to do the same. As Liam raised his hand, preparing to launch his first attack against Zeke, he quickly realized that he was already a step behind. Before he could even make his move, Zeke had closed the distance, his body moving with an astonishing speed and precision that made it nearly impossible for Liam to react. With a fierce determination in his eyes, Zeke unleashed a relentless flurry of attacks, refusing to give Liam even a single moment to counter. Each strike was calculated, aimed with precision to keep Liam completely on the defensive, unable to find an opening to retaliate. Recognizing the need to overwhelm his opponent further, Zeke activated one of his skills, Slash, an A-rank ability that allowed him to launch a barrage of rapid attacks at his enemy. The sheer speed and number of strikes created a chaotic flurry, disrupting Liam's vision and making it difficult for him to track Zeke's movements. It was a technique designed to disorient, forcing an opponent into a defensive position where they could do nothing but endure the onslaught. As the fight continued, the audience watched in stunned silence, their eyes wide with astonishment. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the crowd as they struggled to comprehend what they were witnessing. Zeke's fighting style was unlike anything they had ever seen before, his movements so fast and unpredictable that they could barely keep up. His attacks came in rapid succession, flowing seamlessly from one strike to the next, leaving Liam with little room to react. The instructor, who had been carefully observing the match from the sidelines, found himself equally surprised. He had expected Zeke to display talent, but the way he fought was beyond what anyone could have anticipated. As he continued to watch, a thought crossed his mind: none of the students, nor even the experienced warriors present, had ever witnessed a fighting style like this before. It was no wonder that everyone was so captivated by what they were seeing. Unlike the traditional swordplay that dominated this land, Zeke was using a unique and unorthodox combat technique. The instructor, however, quickly recognized what it was. Zeke's movements, the way he shifted his stance, the relentless flurry of attacks, it was unmistakable. This was a Northern Fist technique, a rare and highly advanced martial art used by the warriors of the North. It was a style that prioritized speed, aggression, and precise strikes, making it incredibly effective in close-quarters combat. But how had Zeke learned such a technique? The Northern Fist was not something that one could simply stumble upon. It was a skill honed through years of rigorous training, passed down through specific warrior lineages. In a land where swords were revered as the ultimate weapon, seeing a hand-to-hand combat technique of this caliber was unheard of. The instructor could not help but wonder how Zeke had acquired such knowledge. Despite his dominance in the fight, Zeke was beginning to feel the strain on his body. He could sense it, the creeping fatigue settling into his limbs, the slight sluggishness in his movements. Although his mind was sharp and his technique flawless, his body was still that of a young child, not yet fully developed or accustomed to such intense combat. He knew how to execute his skills with perfection, but his physical endurance had yet to catch up to the demands of his abilities. He clenched his teeth, pushing himself to maintain his advantage, but he was well aware of his own limits. If he continued at this pace for too long, his body would begin to give out. The strain of using advanced techniques on a frame that was not yet fully matured was beginning to take its toll. He needed to end this fight soon, before exhaustion set in and left him vulnerable. But for now, he had to keep pressing forward, had to keep Liam on the defensive, and had to ensure that his opponent never found the opportunity to strike back. As the fight dragged on, Zeke could feel his stamina depleting at an alarming rate. Every movement, every strike, every skill he used was taking a toll on his body, and the more he pushed himself, the more evident it became that he would not be able to keep this up for much longer. His breathing grew heavier, his muscles burned from exertion, and his movements, while still sharp, were beginning to lose their initial explosiveness. However, even as he acknowledged his own fatigue, he realized that there was another pressing issue he had to deal with: Liam's monstrous physique. Despite the relentless barrage of attacks that Zeke had unleashed, Liam remained standing like an immovable fortress. He had not attempted to counterattack, nor had he shown any intention of dodging. Instead, he simply stood his ground, absorbing every single strike with his powerful frame, his arms raised in a tight defensive stance. It was as if Zeke's attacks, which would have been devastating against any ordinary opponent, were nothing more than minor inconveniences to him. The realization frustrated Zeke, but at the same time, it was not entirely unexpected. Back in his past life, when Liam had risen to the rank of mercenary king, he had been far more aggressive, dominating the battlefield with his sheer might. Yet, at this moment, he was holding back, allowing Zeke to strike freely without retaliating. This was a problem, and Zeke knew it. If Liam was conserving his energy, waiting for the perfect opportunity to counter, then the longer this fight lasted, the more dangerous it would become for Zeke. His body was already approaching its limit, and if he did not finish this soon, he would not have the strength left to defend himself when Liam finally decided to strike back. Understanding the urgency of the situation, Zeke made his decision. He gathered every ounce of remaining strength within him, channeling his energy into his right hand as he prepared for a decisive attack. His muscles tensed, his breathing steadied, and with absolute focus, he activated one of his strongest skills. He locked eyes with Liam, his gaze unwavering, and spoke with absolute confidence, acknowledging the sheer toughness of Liam's body. If Liam's guard was truly unbreakable, then Zeke had no choice but to take him down through sheer force. Liam, however, remained unmoved. His expression was unreadable, his stance unwavering. Even as Zeke declared his intent to break through, Liam showed no signs of fear or hesitation. He stood tall, bracing himself as if he intended to take the full brunt of Zeke's attack head-on, just as he had done with every strike before. Without wasting another moment, Zeke launched himself forward with explosive speed, closing the distance between them in an instant. His right hand, now fully charged with power, shot forward with lethal precision, aiming directly for Liam's guard. The sheer force behind the attack would have been enough to shatter bones upon impact. But then, in that crucial moment, something unexpected happened. Just as Zeke's strike was about to land, Liam, who had remained motionless throughout the entire battle, suddenly moved. With startling agility that completely contradicted his large frame, he dodged the attack at the last possible second, shifting his body just enough to evade the devastating blow. For the first time since the fight had begun, Zeke found himself taken by surprise. His eyes widened slightly as he realized what had just happened. Liam, who had endured every attack without budging, had deliberately chosen this exact moment to dodge. Before Zeke could fully process the implications, Liam moved with terrifying speed. Seizing the opening, he reached out and caught hold of Zeke's arm, his grip like iron shackles that clamped down with unyielding force. Before Zeke had a chance to react, Liam exerted his full strength, lifting him off the ground with ease. Then, with all his might, he swung Zeke downward, aiming to slam him into the earth with bone-crushing force. The sheer power behind the maneuver was overwhelming, and for a brief moment, it seemed as if Zeke was about to be completely overpowered. However, Zeke was not someone who would allow himself to be defeated so easily. His reflexes kicked in instantly, his mind working faster than his body could register. As he was being hurled downward, he twisted his body at just the right angle and struck back. With perfect timing, he drove his knee straight into the back of Liam's head with a powerful counterattack. The impact was immediate. A sharp jolt ran through Liam's body as the strike momentarily stunned him, causing him to loosen his grip just enough for Zeke to slip free. But Zeke knew that one counter alone would not be enough to keep Liam down. He needed to act fast before his opponent recovered. Without hesitation, he activated his class skill, Heightened Senses. The world around him sharpened, his perception accelerating to an unnatural degree. Every movement, every shift in Liam's posture became painfully clear, allowing Zeke to read his opponent's reactions with terrifying accuracy. Using this advantage, Zeke moved with unparalleled speed and precision. His body flowed smoothly, his agility allowing him to maneuver effortlessly around Liam's hulking frame. Within the span of a single breath, he repositioned himself, locking Liam's arm in a perfect submission hold. His legs coiled tightly around Liam's limb, his grip unbreakable as he executed an armbar with deadly efficiency. The strain was immediate, and even someone as physically formidable as Liam would not be able to ignore the immense pressure being applied to his joint. Zeke tightened his hold, his breathing steady despite his exhaustion. His body was on the verge of breaking, but at this moment, he was in control. If Liam did not act fast, his arm would be torn apart. The outcome of the battle now hinged on what happened next. Liam struggled violently against Zeke's unrelenting grip, his body thrashing with sheer force as he attempted to break free from the submission hold. His muscles tensed, veins bulging from the overwhelming strain as he exerted every ounce of strength he possessed. However, Zeke remained steadfast, his grip unwavering as he tightened the hold even further, determined to push Liam to his absolute limit. Zeke knew that no matter how physically powerful Liam was, even the strongest warrior could not function without a steady supply of oxygen to the brain. He had already restricted Liam's movement and had cut off his ability to fight back effectively. Victory was within his grasp. Or so he thought. Just as he was about to declare his dominance over the fight, something unexpected happened. Liam, despite being trapped in such a painful submission hold, still had enough raw power to retaliate. Without hesitation, he began delivering a series of brutal punches directly into Zeke's torso. Each strike was packed with devastating force, and even though Zeke was doing his best to endure, he could feel the damage accumulating with every blow. Pain shot through Zeke's body like fire, his ribs aching from the relentless barrage of attacks. The sheer strength behind Liam's strikes was enough to cause fractures, and Zeke knew that if this continued for too long, his body would eventually give out. His vision wavered slightly from the repeated impacts, his muscles screaming in protest as the fight dragged on. At that moment, as he struggled to maintain his hold while enduring Liam's attacks, Zeke thought to himself that Liam was nothing short of a crazy bastard. Most people would have already surrendered in this situation, but Liam was not like most people. Even while trapped, he refused to go down without a fight. But Zeke was not one to give up so easily either. He had come too far, endured too much, and sacrificed too greatly to allow himself to be defeated here. A fire burned within him, an unshakable will that refused to back down. If Liam wanted to see who would come out on top, then Zeke was more than willing to fight until the very end to prove himself. The battle raged on, both warriors refusing to yield. Liam continued to throw vicious punches, and Zeke endured every single one while maintaining his iron grip. Their bodies bore the marks of their struggle, bruises and wounds decorating their skin like battle scars. The intensity of the fight was unlike anything the audience had ever witnessed before, and they could do nothing but watch in stunned silence, completely captivated by the clash between these two monstrous talents. The fight reached its climax, neither willing to let the other claim victory so easily. However, in the end, there could only be one winner. After enduring countless blows and pushing his body beyond its limits, Zeke finally executed his finishing move. With precise control, he twisted Liam's arm with expert precision, forcing his opponent into complete submission. Liam's body finally gave in, his strength momentarily faltering as pain overtook him. And just like that, the battle was over. Zeke had emerged victorious. The arena was silent for a brief moment before an eruption of shocked gasps filled the air. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. The duel between Zeke and Liam had been nothing short of extraordinary, and the fact that Zeke had managed to come out on top against an opponent as monstrous as Liam left the spectators speechless. But amidst the murmurs of awe and disbelief, one individual stood out from the rest. Unlike the others, who were still recovering from the shock of Zeke's victory, this person bore a menacing smile, their eyes gleaming with dark amusement. They had expected this outcome. From the very beginning, they knew that Zeke was not an ordinary fighter. However, rather than admiration, a different thought crossed their mind: if Zeke was this strong, then taking him down would be all the more satisfying. As they observed Zeke standing triumphantly in the arena, their sinister smile widened. They had just found their next target, and no matter what it took, they were going to make sure that Zeke would fall. The next day, as Zeke was recovering from the intense battle in the Pancration, Decker approached him with a concerned expression. Without hesitation, Decker spoke up, his voice laced with genuine worry, and told Zeke that he had heard about the severe injuries Zeke had sustained during the fight. Decker then proceeded to ask if Zeke was alright, wanting to confirm for himself whether the rumors about Zeke's condition were exaggerated or if his friend was truly in a weakened state. Zeke, unfazed by the concern, responded without much hesitation and assured Decker that he was fine. His body still ached from the fierce exchange of blows he had endured, but he refused to show any weakness. To him, the pain was nothing more than proof of his growth, a necessary consequence of pushing himself beyond his limits. Decker, however, was not entirely convinced by Zeke's words alone. With a thoughtful expression, he spoke up once more and, with a respectful yet firm tone, expressed that if it was not impertinent of him, he wished to check Zeke's pulse. Decker was careful with his words, making sure not to overstep any boundaries, but his true intentions were clear. He was not simply concerned about Zeke's injuries, he wanted to confirm something far more important. Zeke, upon hearing Decker's request, immediately understood the underlying motive behind it. He thought to himself that Decker was not merely checking for lingering injuries, he was trying to confirm whether or not Zeke had awakened his aura. This was the true reason behind his insistence on examining him. Realizing this, Zeke took a moment to weigh his options before ultimately deciding that there was no reason to refuse. After a brief pause, he told Decker to wait for a moment, then extended his hand toward him, allowing Decker to conduct the examination as he saw fit. Decker, seeing that Zeke had granted him permission, gave a small nod of gratitude before proceeding. Without wasting any time, he placed his fingers gently over Zeke's wrist and, with practiced precision, channeled his own aura into Zeke's body. His movements were smooth, his control flawless, as he carefully scanned every inch of Zeke's internal energy pathways, searching for any signs of an awakened aura. As this process unfolded, Zeke found himself unexpectedly stunned by the sheer finesse of Decker's technique. He had experienced aura examinations before, but never one as thorough as this. In that moment, Zeke couldn't help but wonder if Decker was a Blue Knight. The level of skill Decker displayed was not something an ordinary warrior could achieve. Zeke further reasoned that when most people attempted to check for aura awakening, they would usually only focus on a single point, the dantian, where one's core energy resided. However, Decker was going far beyond that. Instead of limiting his search to one area, he was meticulously examining Zeke's entire body, ensuring that no signs of awakening went unnoticed. But what truly caught Zeke off guard was not just Decker's thoroughness, it was his ability to imbue someone else's body with aura while maintaining complete control. This was a feat that was notoriously difficult to accomplish, even for highly skilled warriors. The level of precision required to seamlessly integrate one's aura into another person's body without causing harm was something only those of exceptional talent could achieve. As Zeke processed all of this, his initial suspicion only grew stronger. If Decker was capable of such refined aura control, then there was little doubt in Zeke's mind, Decker had to be of the rank of a Blue Knight. It was not something an ordinary fighter could achieve, nor was it something that could be learned through simple training. This level of mastery could only belong to someone of true skill and discipline. Zeke's mind raced with these thoughts as he remained still, allowing Decker to continue his examination. Whatever the outcome, one thing had become abundantly clear to Zeke: Decker was far more formidable than he had originally assumed. Not all knights were the same, and they were classified according to their martial prowess and their level of proficiency in aura manipulation. At the very foundation of this hierarchy was the white swordsman, considered the novice level, where most children found themselves before undergoing the blessing rite. These individuals possessed no aura and relied solely on physical strength and basic combat techniques. It was the starting point for all warriors, a stage of raw potential yet to be realized. The next step in the hierarchy was the yellow swordsman, a level that signified one's awakening to aura. Those who had successfully opened their dantian and begun harnessing their internal energy could claim this rank. It was a significant milestone, marking the beginning of a warrior's true journey toward mastering the art of combat. All trainees of the cradle, without exception, attained this level after undergoing the blessing rite, as it was the very foundation upon which their future growth would be built. However, true strength only emerged when one gained full control over their aura. Once a warrior learned to manipulate their energy freely, they earned the revered title of knight. Among them, the Purple Knight stood as the threshold to true mastery. At this level, one could reinforce their sword with aura, vastly increasing both their attack power and durability. It was a skill that separated the average fighter from the elite. Beyond this, the true monsters of the battlefield began to emerge. Those who had reached the rank of Blue Knight possessed an even greater level of control over their energy, allowing them to manifest an aura blade. This ability turned a simple weapon into an extension of one's will, capable of cutting through steel as though it were paper. Few ever reached this stage, and those who did were regarded as extraordinary warriors of great renown. But even the Blue Knights paled in comparison to those who had transcended their limits, the Red Knights. This was the realm of legends, the domain of warriors who had reached the peak of human capability. The mercenary king, Liam, had once stood in this exalted position, wielding unparalleled strength and skill. Zeke, too, in his past life before his regression, had climbed to this peak, standing as one of the most formidable warriors of his time. And yet, even among the Red Knights, there existed something even greater, an existence so rare and overwhelming that their numbers could be counted on one hand across the entire continent. These warriors were known as Black Knights, individuals whose power defied comprehension, monsters in human form who could single-handedly turn the tide of a war. As these thoughts surfaced in Zeke's mind, he found himself contemplating a certain anomaly that had been bothering him. It made no sense that someone as skilled as Decker, a man whose capabilities were enough to place him in a commanding position, was now playing the role of Zeke's babysitter. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that there was something unusual about Decker's situation. However, Zeke quickly dismissed the thought. Whether Decker was a Blue Knight or not held little significance to him at that moment. Regardless of his rank or skill, there was one thing that Zeke was absolutely certain of: Decker would never be able to detect Zeke's ether. Unlike aura, ether was something far more esoteric, a force that only two people in the entire world could wield. Decker was not one of those two, which meant that no matter how meticulous his examination was, he would find nothing out of the ordinary. Yet, despite this, Decker seemed to sense that something was amiss. After carefully scanning Zeke's body and finding no traces of an awakened aura, a flicker of doubt passed through his expression. It was subtle, but Zeke caught it. There was an unease in Decker's eyes, as though something did not quite add up. Finally, after a brief pause, Decker spoke up and asked Zeke if he was hiding something from him. His voice was calm, but there was a distinct weight behind his words, a clear indication that he was not asking out of mere curiosity. He genuinely suspected something. Zeke, however, remained composed. His face betrayed no emotions as he looked directly into Decker's eyes. Instead of answering, he simply turned the question back on him, calmly asking why Decker was making such an inquiry. His tone was neutral, giving nothing away, but his gaze was sharp, watching carefully for any reaction. Then, without giving Decker a chance to respond, Zeke countered with a question of his own, asking whether Decker was, in turn, hiding something from him. A tense silence followed. Neither of them spoke, and for a moment, the two simply stood there, locked in an unspoken exchange. It was a battle of wills, a test of patience between two individuals who were both aware that there was more beneath the surface than either was letting on. But in the end, it was Zeke who broke the silence first. His lips curled into a slight smirk as he casually dismissed the entire exchange, telling Decker that he had only been joking. His words carried a light-hearted tone, as though the entire conversation had been nothing more than a passing jest. However, even as he spoke, the sharp glint in his eyes remained, silently conveying that the game between them was far from over. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.